The year is 1944. A German corporal, captured in the desperate hedges of Normandy, is marched behind the lines. For years, he'd fought for the Führer, believing in the inevitable victory of the Aryan race against the weakened, decadent West. He'd seen the hunger in his own country, felt the bite of meager rations, and tasted the dust of a collapsing war machine. Then, he is shipped across the Atlantic, to the United States. He steps off the train, expecting the cold, sterile confines of a wartime prison. But then, he sees it. Not a weapon, not a tank, but a tiny piece of confectionery. Something he hasn't seen since he was a child. He's standing in a canteen, clutching a few cents in camp scrip, and he has a choice to make, between a chilled, sparkling bottle of Coca-Cola and a scoop of creamy, frozen ice cream. A choice that, for him, shattered the entire ideology he had fought and bled for. This is the story of the Golden Cage, and how America's abundance became one of its most powerful, and least expected, weapons of war. The Second World War was, at its core, a war of logistics. Every bullet, every uniform, every loaf of bread had to be produced and transported. And by 1943, the German war machine, the Wehrmacht, was running on fumes. Decades of blitzkrieg strategy, the emphasis on rapid, tactical victories, had neglected the long-term, grinding realities of supply. Germany was a resource-poor nation, forced to plunder Europe to feed its war. Food rationing for its own civilians was brutal and continuous, and its soldiers, particularly on the unforgiving Eastern Front, were chronically underfed. Accounts from German soldiers in the final years speak of subsisting on scraps, seeing friends starve, and the sheer impossibility of resupply. Across the ocean, an entirely different reality was unfolding. The United States, untouched by enemy bombers, fueled by the vast resources of an entire continent, and driven by a fully mobilized economy, was becoming the arsenal of democracy. The sheer scale of American industrial output was incomprehensible to the rest of the world. One B-24 bomber rolled out of the Ford Willow Run factory every 63 minutes. The logistics system, epitomized by the Red Ball Express, was an unstoppable torrent of supplies. When Germany was forced to surrender large numbers of troops in North Africa and, later, after D-Day, Britain quickly ran out of space. The solution? Ship them to the source of the unstoppable torrent, America. From 1942 to 1945, nearly 400,000 German POWs were sent to over 500 camps across 46 U.S. states, primarily in the South and Southwest. This mass transfer wasn't merely a solution to a housing problem. It set the stage for a dramatic, yet quiet, ideological confrontation. These were men, many of them loyal, fanatical believers in the superiority of the Third Reich, suddenly immersed in the belly of the beast. The moment they arrived, the confusion began. Nazi propaganda had painted America as a dying, degenerate, racially mixed society. What the POWs saw was anything but. First, there was the food. The 1929 Geneva Convention required POWs to receive the same rations in quantity and quality as the captors' own troops. For the U.S. Army, this meant the aforementioned high-calorie rations. In the camps, German POWs were often fed better than the average American civilian, who was subject to strict rationing of staples like sugar, meat, and coffee. Veteran Gunter Graw, captured in Normandy, recalled his arrival. All we cared about was the food. He wasn't talking about sustenance, he was talking about abundance. Steak, white bread, fresh milk, butter, and coffee. They were so unused to the quantities that, initially, many burned the excess food, fearing that they'd be accused of wastefulness and have their rations cut. They didn't realize the American supply chain was that efficient. Then came the extraordinary shock of the luxury goods. The POWs were paid in scrip, 80 cents a day if they worked, which was common due to labor shortages on American farms and non-military factories. This scrip could be spent at the camp canteen. This is where the legend was born. The canteen stocked cigarettes, a prized item, writing materials, but also Coca-Cola and ice cream. For men who had been told their country was the logistical powerhouse of Europe, seeing these frivolous luxuries readily available, during a war, was a mental lightning bolt. Ice cream, a treat reserved for the highest echelons in Germany, was a common dessert in the American camps. Coca-Cola, the ultimate symbol of American consumerism, was a daily purchase. This abundance was more than just a meal. It was a psychological weapon. It didn't need a loudspeaker or a political lecture. The evidence was in the flavor of the Coke and the satisfying coldness of the ice cream. The Nazi concept of American weakness, which they had been fed for years, crumbled with every scoop. The experience extended far beyond the camp. Under the Geneva Convention, POWs could be put to work in non-military jobs, and American agriculture desperately needed the labor. Tens of thousands of German prisoners were hired out to local farms and canneries. They saw the reality of the American heartland: vast, mechanized farms unlike anything in Europe, ordinary civilian homes with cars, radios, and a standard of living that even German aristocracy struggled to match. The sheer scale of the country, the endless train lines, the size of the harvests, told a story no propaganda could counter. This close contact with American civilians, often people of German descent, further eroded their loyalties. Farmers and camp guards, despite the war, often treated the men with unexpected kindness. Former POWs recalled families inviting them for Christmas dinners, and the prisoners being treated like people. It was the antithesis of the brutality they were trained to believe was necessary for victory. By the end of their captivity, the seeds of doubt were firmly planted. Hardcore Nazis were separated and sent to dedicated camps, but the vast majority of German POWs became witnesses to the reality of the enemy's might and humanity. When the war ended in 1945, the repatriation of the nearly 400,000 German POWs began. For many, this return was a descent from the golden cage into a bleak, broken homeland. Post-war Germany was starving, its cities pulverized, and its economy ruined. The POWs returned with a unique, 2-year-long education in American logistics, industry, and culture. Their accounts were vital. They returned not as shattered enemies but as reluctant evangelists for a different system. They were living proof of the sheer scale and generosity of the decadent enemy. They spoke of the food, the work, the freedom of movement compared to what they faced in Germany even before the surrender. They became a crucial, if subtle, psychological force in the early post-war years. This experience of captivity had two massive, long-term impacts: re-education and post-war leadership. The U.S. initiated re-education programs, sharing information about democracy, the true nature of the Nazi regime, including the Holocaust, which many refused to believe until they saw the evidence, and American institutions. Men like Walter Hallstein, a former POW, would go on to become a key architect of the European Economic Community, predecessor to the EU. The POWs returned with an unprecedented exposure to the West's democratic ideals and, crucially, its capability. The Marshall Plan and U.S. soft power. The memory of the POW experience made the implementation of the Marshall Plan years later much easier. The U.S. wasn't an abstract enemy, it was the country that gave them ice cream and a clean bed. The American commitment to rebuilding Europe was given a human face, cemented by the positive experiences of nearly 500,000 of Germany's young men. The true significance of the Golden Cage wasn't just the humane treatment, it was the demonstration of unstoppable power through production. The enemy could afford to feed you, employ you, and even give you luxuries, all while fighting a two-front global war. It was the material proof that the Third Reich's vision of world domination was a logistical and industrial fantasy. The story of the German POWs in America is a powerful reminder that wars are won not just on the battlefield but in the factories, on the supply lines, and sometimes, in the chow hall. It is a tale that underscores the value of adhering to the rules of war, even when fighting an enemy that disregards them. The generosity, the food, the ice cream, it wasn't just compliance with the Geneva Convention. It was a profound act of soft power. It showed the captured enemy soldiers the kind of society America was, demonstrating its immense power not through brutality, but through a standard of life that was unimaginable in their own collapsing nation. When we think of the Second World War, we envision massive tank battles and heroic air campaigns. But tucked away in the American heartland, a different kind of war was being fought, a quiet, psychological battle won with a simple, irresistible appeal of a chilled bottle of Coke and a scoop of sweet, creamy ice cream. It was a taste of what the world could be, and for those 400,000 men, it was the first taste of their country's inevitable defeat, and the beginning of a future built on cooperation, not conquest.